of that, that obviously can make a lot of damage. And that, of course, depends, as I said, on the wind.
Absolutely does. Storm surge, we talk about it all the time, and I think we've been good over the past day or so of actually defining it for our viewers. It is those levels above normal. When we talk 4 to 6 feet of storm surge here in the West Palm Beach area along the intercoastal, that's 4 to 6 feet above that level right there. We're at low tide now, by the way, so the tide's going to be higher in about 12 hours. So we're at low tide now. The tide is going to come up 4 to 6 feet above that. Then, as you mentioned, Anderson, wave activity on top of that. That means that's going to be a washover there, probably on Flagler Avenue, Flagler Drive here in in Palm Beach. So, and again, over here to the left, Palm Beach, the barrier island, that's a lower elevation. They could get some really serious flooding there. You're right. The wave activity just makes it worse.
Yeah, Brian Todd, appreciate you being there. We're going to take a short break, and our coverage continues coming up.
Better on the storm. Now, the American model did better on the snowstorm of 2015. They're about 15 or 20 miles apart. And Michael, if you put that same line, you put these two same lines in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, let me put it ahead here for you. If you say, okay, the storm's going to be here, that's the American model, there's the European model, boy, they're really close. Because you know what?
Is in the Weather Center. Allison, let's bring us up to date.
Right, Anderson. So we take a look at what we've got for right now. Again, you've got some imagery here where we can see the latest on Irma. Winds right now 125 miles per hour, gusting up to 155 miles per hour. The movement, it's been what we call wobbling, okay, where it's going back and forth between west and north and west and north. The question is, when does it finally start to make that really sharp turn to the north? We focus on the maximum wind gusts. Notice for the most part, it's the western half of Florida where we have our strongest winds. Key West, this will be our peak maximum wind gust around 138 miles per hour. But say up around Fort Myers, 136, even Tampa going to be in the triple digits, right around 116 miles per hour. The track itself will still take it over portions of the Keys and then riding up along the western coast, making a very close call towards Naples, Fort Myers, even into Tampa. So those are going to be the cities of concern going forward in about the next 36 to 48 hours. Here's a look at the forecast radar. So this shows you not just where it's headed, but where some of the heavy rain is going to be as well. When we get to Sunday morning, this is when we really start to see incredibly heavy downpours for cities like Miami into Fort Myers. Then we push into Sunday afternoon and evening. Now Tampa starting to get some incredibly heavy rainfall. And then the system itself begins to make its way into portions of Georgia and also into South Carolina. Overall rainfall totals, we're talking widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, but it could even be slightly higher than that, and especially when you get some of those outer bands where you could end up getting incredibly heavy downpours for several hours at a time. But the rain spreads even farther north. So even states like Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina could end up picking up, say, 4 to 6 inches of rain. We've noticed the hurricane watches and warnings continue to spread to the north. Hurricane warnings now extending from the northernmost part all the way down through the entire state. And we now have tropical storm watches in effect for portions of South Carolina as well as Georgia. Anderson?
You talk about that turn. Any way to estimate when that turn north might occur? Because obviously, there are tens of thousands of people watching that very closely because it's going to affect exactly where this thing goes.
Right. Likely it will happen within the next 6 to 12 hours, but you also have to keep in mind that's getting awfully close to when we expect it to cross over the Florida Keys. You've got a couple of things driving it. You've got a high-pressure system sitting out here over the open Atlantic. You've got a high-pressure sitting right around the Texas coastline. Those two combinations are what's going to be driving it to push that right-hand turn over the main peninsula of Florida. Then you also have that high that's over the main portion of the U.S. that's going to break away. That's what's going to allow the storm, once it crosses into places like Georgia and Tennessee, and take its track from there. But ultimately, Anderson, again, 6 hours versus 12. We know it's likely going to happen in that time period. But if it happens 6 versus 12, there's a huge difference there on who actually will end up taking the ultimate landfall. So again, while we have a range, the opposite ends of that range could mean huge differences for several cities.
Keys, and maybe most importantly on the west coast of Florida, and when? Allison.
That's right, John. So we take a look at the current numbers that we have right now. Irma is a Category 3 storm, but a very strong Category 3 storm. Winds right now 125 miles per hour, just 5 miles per hour stronger, and it would be a Category 4 storm. So I want you to understand, you're talking a difference of 5 miles per hour here. So don't focus on the category number so much, but the intensity of the winds. Movement is west at about 9 miles per hour, but we have started to see at least a slight shift off to the north as well. One of the big concerns is going to be maximum wind gusts. Take a look at some of these numbers. Key West, we're talking around 138 miles per hour. This will be at the peak as the storm is crossing over that region. Naples and Fort Myers also in that 130 to 130 mile per hour range. Even Tampa likely to be around 116. Now the East Coast, while it may not be as strong, you're still talking pretty strong wind gusts. In fact, Orlando looking at 95 miles per hour for their peak wind gust. Storm surge is also going to be a huge.
All right, John Berman in Miami. Hurricane Irma has begun making the turn to the north. We are feeling consistent winds now here in Miami, 30 miles an hour, maybe a little bit more, and they probably won't go down for 12, 24 hours right now. Here to stay as this storm moves ever closer to the Florida Peninsula. Joining me now, David Halstead, the former Director of Emergency Management in the state of Florida. David, thanks so much for being with us, talking about the wind, but it does seem that the real concern right now is the storm surge, particularly on the west coast of Florida, talking about 10 to 15 feet in some places. And when you hear from the governor, when you hear from the director of FEMA, that's what they're watching so very closely. Why is it such a threat?
The storm surge, especially on the west coast, that's a lower area than we are here, even Miami. 10, 15 feet would have been a real problem here. Over there, it's really a hazard and a concern for life safety. So the governor and certainly Administrator Long are all saying the right things, as are the local officials. Remember, the people are listening to their local officials. That is, evacuate or get to a shelter. We saw long lines today at a shelter, but that cleared up, and now those folks are in a safe environment.
To be clear, Drew Griffin was at that shelter with a long line. Everyone's inside now, and there still is space there. Some of the free buses have stopped running. You have to get yourself there. That's a little bit of a concern. People need to evacuate from these low-lying areas. Why do they need to listen so carefully?
They need to listen so carefully because people are going to die because of water. Rarely are they going to die because of the winds. Rarely are they going to die from other causes. What they're going to die from is flooding and storm surge. And right now, storm surge has the potential of being the real killer on the West Coast, and still a big concern here on the East Coast. And I'm still very concerned, and I think everyone is, about what's going to happen down in the Keys as that storm moves through.
The Keys may feel a direct hit in just a few hours as the storm passes over. Let's come here to Miami, because may not get a hit from the eye, but probably expecting hurricane force winds, at least gusts, and a storm surge of 3 to 6 feet. What should the message be to the people here who've probably been inside for days now watching, now saying, hey, the eye might not hit here? What should they be careful of?
Well, I think all of Florida should follow Miami-Dade and Miami Beach's approach to this. They're taking this exceptionally seriously. They're going to stay sheltered down. They're going to stay off the roadways until the hurricane force winds and tropical storm winds have gone by. And then another danger has the potential of coming behind it, and that is people coming out too early, becoming injured, driving on flooded streets, not looking for down power lines. So we still got some dangers even after the storm. But so far, this area in particular has obeyed those evacuation orders.
Yeah. Don't come back. Do not come back until you are told to. David, hang on one second. We have some pictures here I want to show people on I-4. This is I-4, the famous highway that goes across the state of Florida right now. We're seeing a lot of cars there, long lines, people trying to move inland from the west. They still have a little time that far north, David. What should they be thinking?
They should be thinking, let's evacuate, let's get to a shelter, or let's get into a home that's been fortified to withstand certainly Category 3 type storm winds, because that looks like what Central Florida, according to our meteorologists, is going to expect.
And again, just to focus on storm surge for one brief moment, when we say, 3 to 6 feet or 10 to 15 feet, it's not as if there's a wave and then it goes away. That water sticks around.
It stays around until the winds change, and then typically those winds will push it back offshore. But we could be talking 4, 5, 6 hours of these large amount of water and high water into these areas.
And that means up until the first stories of a house or so. Just one last thing, the Florida Keys, again, we're saying they may get a direct hit. What could happen there? Will they be cut off?
They could be cut off. What we planned for when we were at the division, Craig Fugate and I, we planned for a Category 4 or 5 hitting the Keys, not so much destroying the bridge, because those bridges are pretty intact, but all of the ways onto the bridges are susceptible to high water and high waves. So if it cuts off the roadway to get to a bridge, you might as well down the bridge because you can't get to them by land. So therefore, you've heard Administrator Long talk about naval vessels, helicopters. That's going to be the only way to get to those folks at one end of the Keys if they are cut off.
All right, David Halstead, former Director of Emergency Management here in Florida. I hope people have been listening to you, heeding the warnings from you and from all the current officials now, warning people to evacuate while they still have time. Hurricane Irma, again, making that bend now to the north, very close to the Florida Keys, inching toward the peninsula itself. CNN Special Live coverage continues.
Right, with this particular storm. We got some updated numbers a few hours ago that really made these numbers rise. In fact, especially in the southwest portion, say Naples down towards Key Largo, we're talking 10 to 15 feet. Miami down towards Key West, 5 to 10 feet. Even around the Fort Myers area, you're talking 6 to 10 feet. The numbers, however, you have to understand what they mean. So let's take a look at this, for example. Just to talk about storm surge. 10 feet is what an average first-story building is. So if you have storm surge of 10 feet, and keep in mind, some places we're actually forecasting higher than 10 feet. Some areas it could be as much as 15 feet, which means it would start creeping into the second story of a home or a business or something like that. But this is just the storm surge. Now you also have to factor in the waves. This is where true inundation takes place, because it's not just the amount of rain, or not just the amount of water that has been pushed in from the storm surge, but those waves, the crests of those waves can add water that has been pushed in from the storm surge. But those waves, the crests of those waves, can add even a couple more feet on top of that. So you talk about 5 to 6 feet. You know, if you've got a person that's 6 feet tall, you are now completely submerged underwater, and you've got the waves moving everything around. This is where it gets very concerning, especially those higher amounts too. You could have cars submerged. So if you take that car out onto a street as the storm surge is pushing in, you will have absolutely no control over that vehicle, even though the car may not be fully submerged at that point. Now, when we talk about the track, this is the part that everybody is concerned about, because you want to know where landfall is expected to be. However, because of the size of the storm, at this point, that really is just semantics. Everybody around Florida is going to get some impact from this storm. Some will just get like bigger impacts than others, namely the winds. Here's what we expect. We do expect it to increase back to a Category 4 strength storm as it crosses over the Keys and continues its way up the west coast. Right now, landfall could be anywhere from, say, Naples to Fort Myers, even up around Tampa. And Tampa is a huge city. A lot of people in Tampa did not necessarily evacuate, especially several days ago, thinking this was mostly going to be an East Coast main landfall of a storm, but that is now starting to change. Then we see the track kind of push further into the north, states like Alabama, Georgia, as well as Tennessee. And the other thing, John, to note is we are still talking a pretty good amount of rain. We've talked about storm surge, we've talked about wind, but don't count out the rain. We could be looking at widespread rainfall totals of 6 to 12 inches of rain.
All right, Allison Chinchar, an important forecast, the point that people should really listen to there, where you're talking about.
And we're live in the Weather Center right here, of course, tracking Hurricane Irma. And we'll go right to the satellite imagery and show you the latest advisory that came in. 3 p.m. is when they just did a kind of a position update along with a maximum wind speed update. 125 miles per hour was the last update we came in. Steve Jervey's here with us now. He's been updating everyone on 970 WFLA, the radio. So we're keeping you informed on the web, on the radio,
on air right now. All of a sudden, we're a bigger deal because the mayor's sitting right over there.
Yes.
All of a sudden, is it proclaim this National Weather Day? No? I hope not. Well, hopefully it's National Preparation Day, because that's what we really want to see as people get ready for this major hurricane that is running at 125 right now, running right along the northern part of the Cuban coast. Recall 24 hours ago, with this 155 mile per hour winds, it's been interacting with land now for a day and a half. So that tends to take a lot of the fuel, the warm water for the system, and that's why a large reason why it's weakened. But we're just waiting for that northerly turn, which the computer models have suggested for days now will occur, and they still continue to suggest that, as does the official track, Julie.
Exactly, and we're still looking at really the Keys getting hit hard by the system first as we head into Sunday morning. Could be a Category 4 storm again. That looks likely as it moves to the north and west. Of course, exactly which area in the Keys it hits, the eye passes over would depend on how quickly it turns towards the north. And then it will continue north. And you notice this cone and the track has continued to shift even since this morning at the 11 a.m. update. That was the last time they updated the track. This did shift just a little bit farther to the west. So we're looking at a potential landfall near the Fort Myers area. Although this is always subject to change, this is just a forecast. That's why we show you that whole cone, because there is plenty of room for error still at this point. The storm will weaken gradually as it moves through the Tampa Bay area, but if it moves on shore near the Fort Myers area as a Category 4, you notice Monday at 8 a.m. when it's moving out of our area, it's...
And welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma, coming to you from Fort Myers, Florida. If you've been watching over the last couple hours, you know that we've been talking about people who days ago were in Miami or Miami Beach, faced with the idea of where to evacuate to, and they chose to move west, often to Tampa, because they thought that would be safer. Now, today, they woke up to a very different reality with the storm having moved to the west. Now, Tampa in the line of this storm as it moves up northward here to Naples, Fort Myers, then as far as Tampa, probably getting hurricane force winds in Tampa by Sunday night around 8 o'clock, according to the latest. Bryn Gingras is on I-4, I think I-4 East, just getting a sense of the traffic coming out of Tampa. What are you seeing there? And is it people who have decided to try to leave Tampa and head to points east to Orlando or elsewhere, or even back to Miami?
Oh, yeah, Anderson. We saw people that are trying to head east up to Daytona Beach. We talked to someone who actually said he just wants to be out of Florida completely. He wants to go all the way back to New York City. Now, we're along I-4 East, as you said, Anderson, and the traffic is at pretty much a slow crawl right now. There are times we have seen it that it has been bumper to bumper. It's certainly bumper to bumper further up as you get closer to Orlando. We're about 25 miles outside of Orlando right now, but it has been like this for the past 2 or 3 hours. Me and my crew, we actually drove it for the past 2 hours, stopping at different rest points along the way, talking to people, because those rest stops are all full of people with their pets, giving their pets some relief, also just picking up on some last-minute items like water and food. They are just packed at this point, also, of course, fueling up. But this is what it has been like at times. People so frustrated that they had to drive on the shoulder just to get to some point where they're actually moving. We also saw some emergency vehicles on that shoulder as well, several of them, giving us the thought that maybe there was some evacuations at some point. But, yeah, the other thing, Anderson, you talk about the people that were seeking relief in the Tampa area and then coming back this way. We certainly saw that in Orlando. We talked to a lot of people who were staying in the same hotel as us, quite frankly, and they were evacuated from the east, so they moved west to Orlando and then heard that their area was no longer under an evacuation order, decided to pack up and quickly get back to their homes east before the storm hits, and they wouldn't be able to travel. So there's a lot of variables that are going on as people watch this storm closely. One thing I want to point out to you, Anderson, though, is as all these cars are leaving the area of concern, that Tampa, Fort Myers, Naples area, we just saw about 5 or 6 National Guard vehicles heading in that direction. Anderson?
Yeah. It's going to be needed, no doubt about it, looking at the sizes. And for those folks who are on the highway, if there's any good news at all, is that this storm is pretty slow moving, which at least for those who have already left gives them time, even if the traffic is pretty slow. We'll continue to check in, see how the highways are on that road and others. I want to go to Allison Chinchar, who's standing by, just monitoring the tracking of this. Let's just get a sense of the latest, Allison.
That's right. So the big shift that we've seen is now we're starting to see that turn to the north and make its way to Florida. In doing that, however, it now means the eye of the storm is back out over open water, and very warm open water at that. That is what's going to allow this storm to re-intensify over the coming hours. The official forecast from the National Hurricane Center does take that track back up to a Category 4 strength directly over the Florida Keys. Then it continues up the west coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, then into into Tampa, where it will weaken pretty quickly. But again, the big question for a lot of people has been, why is it going to take such a sharp turn to the right? Why not just go back out over the open Gulf? So here's why. The past couple of days, what's been steering the storm is this high pressure right here in the Atlantic. Now, as it edges closer to Florida, it's now going to start to interact with the high pressure just off the coast of Texas. That's essentially blocking it from going too far into the Gulf. Then, as it goes north, it's going to interact with this portion of air, but that's going to retreat, allowing the storm to be able to push pretty far inland, maybe as far as, say, Tennessee, even into Kentucky. So that's going to be the concern. Now, the major concerns going forward are going to be storm surge. We're talking 5 to 10 feet south of Miami through Key West, 10 to 15 feet from Naples down towards Key Largo, even Tampa looking at 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. And then we started to see even some of that creep into portions of Georgia and South Carolina with 4 to 6 feet of storm surge. Winds also going to be a huge factor. Take a look at some of these numbers. For maximum wind gusts, 134 miles per hour in Fort Myers, 135 in Key West, even Orlando, which is pretty far